Broadly, we've been doing change work for the last few years, focused around helping people to be active, but really thinking about how do we change the system so that it's easier for everyone to be active in our place. And we've developed this model for change where you can see in the middle that we've come to understand that it's the behaviours, mindsets, approaches, skills and capabilities of, if you like, professionals who work within the system for local authorities, for the NHS, within social enterprises, within leisure and others. It's the things that we do within our work that's going to make the biggest difference to the capability, I suppose, or the opportunity for people to be active. And it's how we then apply those mindsets and approaches, skills and capabilities, both within our places, within the places and spaces that people can move, and within the systems where systems and lives meet, where people's day-to-day lives interact with us as colleagues in councils or the health service or others. And so one of the things that we've really focused on and discovered is that it's these behaviours together, really, the collaborative effort, the ways in which we work in a connected way that's making the biggest difference. And so that leads us to this idea of building effective networks so that within our organisations, but then more broadly, within our places and communities, we can work collaboratively with others to change the way things work. So why do we need to build effective networks? Touched on a couple of things then. So we're going to think about the why. We're going to think about what does it look like, and then we're going to think about, how do I do that? So first of all, we've done some thinking about, why these places why these networks important within our organisations. From an individual perspective, networks and connections help us to feel a sense of belonging. They can give us this sense of reassurance. We can find help and support. There's a space for us to ask questions and get advice, and broadly, networks help us, our relationships and connections with others help us to make sense of things. One of the things the research has been showing is that there's a good proportion of people within our organisations who feel a sense of loneliness, a lack of social connection, and that's been compounded, if you like, by the COVID pandemic. When you think about small groups or teams, the importance of being, or the benefits of being connected, is increased engagement and morale and motivation, the space for us to learn together, to challenge each other, to give feedback and to share the workload. And then when we think kind of in a bigger sense of our wider networks, they create the opportunity for us to share resources, to generate understanding through research, to support communities in a collaborative way, to really harness stories and the power of stories, and to build social movements and to build a sense of progress together within our places. And they create a sense of safety and assurance when we feel like we're in it together with others, and that helps us to build momentum. So what do networks look like? So in very simple terms, a bit of theory, I suppose, around different types of networks. There's many different types of networks, but here's three that we talk about often. And I think within the public sector, we often find ourselves working in quite centralised networks. And often this is kind of how we've built our structures, if you like, within local places. So you can imagine in a place where we have, say, a local authority, a council, for example, who have a range of contracts with different suppliers and organisations that they work with in partnerships. And that creates a centralised network where lots of the power and control, or certainly old power, sits with the organisation or the person who's in the middle. Slightly different but similar style is to have a decentralised network. And you can imagine this at an organisational level, that you've got a range of different teams within an organisation who connect to each other, but are then slightly siloed and separate from their different teams or organisations within the whole. But what we found when it comes to really building change and resilient and sustainable change in the way in which things work, both organisationally and then in ecosystems, is the closer you can get to a distributed network, the more resilient it is, and the more collaborative progress you can make. And the real difference here, or the main features of a distributed network, is that there isn't that central sort of power holding organization or individual, but that everyone is connected to each other in a variety of different ways. And you could see here, you can imagine if one organization or person left or changed or was different, that the structure of the network would remain resilient. The more we can build distributed networks where organizations are working collaboratively in the right moments and places, that can make a real difference, both in terms of long-term sustainability, but also in the collaborative effort. And so today we're talking about trying to build distributed networks. And in the system change theory, there's a chap called Myron Rogers who has Myron's maxims, which have become really foundational principles of leading change within ecosystems or places. And one of those maxims is to connect the system to more of itself, or in other words, to start to build these distributed networks. And it's important to understand that organizational structures, both within a single organization or within, say, a local place, don't represent the way in which the network works. So you can see here this black square representing the CEO of this organization. But when you think about how everyone's actually connected, the CEO might have very limited influence or connection to others and have no connection at all to this group over here or this individual here. And this person here in this example, feeling lonely, disconnected, disengaged, probably not being particularly effective at work potentially or productive because of that lack of connection to the whole. And so it's really important not to make assumptions about the way in which our networks and organizations work, and that information does flow in this. The information does flow, in these organizational lines. That's not how it works. You've got people who are disconnected, as I mentioned there. You've got individuals who are connecting a whole silo together. You've got a chief executive who has limited connections, and with limited connection, limited real influence over the way people feel and the way people act and the way people behave in their organization. One of the things that's come from some of the research around organizations and networks is this principle of the 3%, that 3% of the people within the network have the ability to influence 90% of the people within the network. And this is what Innovisor call the 3% rule. And we found this in some of our work to be similar. What's interesting is that as the senior leaders within an organization very rarely know who this 3% is. Who are these people who are holding the influence? And it's because, broadly speaking, within networks, as a general rule, the people who are influencing the way in which the others see the world and feel about the world tend to not be the ones who are loud and the big storytellers and the ones stood at the front of meetings and speaking first. And so when you think about who are these influencers within our networks, they're typically introverts. They're typically people who are quiet, who listen first, who seek to understand, who are kind and have high empathy. Because people like to talk to them. They're the people that we go to make sense of the world. They're the people that we go to get energy, because we find those conversations energizing and engaging. And they listen first and then make sense of things and give advice later. And so if you think about an example, for example, an organization that's going through a significant restructuring, then the management team or the chief executive might announce said restructuring plan as something really useful, and it's going to help our organization to transform. But then, of course, we all go away, don't we? And we start to have conversations at lunchtime and in our offices and in our teams. And it's this 3% of people who are influencing how the whole organization then feels about the change that's been proposed. And if the 3% are not bought into the change and they don't like it, and they're saying things like, "Oh, I'm not sure, I don't quite think that makes sense to me," then broadly that becomes the feel of the 90% of the organization as well. So it's really important to think about, when we're thinking about building networks, who are those people who hold influence? And so how do you find them? Broadly, it's not more or less complicated, and of course there's lots of science to it to do it at scale. But if you want to start to think about in your team or your organization, who are those that have the influence within our network? You can ask people within that network. It's a peer-to-peer finding. It's asking the people within the team or the space or the place these types of questions. Who do you go to for advice? Who helps you to make sense of things? Who do you regularly connect with? Who do you trust for reliable information? Who gives you energy when you talk to them? It's these types of people that you can identify, or at least you can reflect on for yourself. Who are those people in your life, in your organization, your network, that you would go to talk about these types of things, or you would regularly connect to? And the likelihood is that's the same for others. It's those same people who are providing that safe space and that thoughtful space to influence the way in which we think and feel about things. So how can you love this quote: to persuade the undecided, send them someone they trust. And this was a quote, I think, from Abraham Lincoln, talking about how to win elections. But we're going to think now a little bit about how do you develop, build, or influence within your network. And there's some principles that we found in Together and Active Future, some principles of network building to start with. And these are not necessarily the actions that you take, but for some things to be thoughtful about, some things to be mindful of. So first of all, it's important to understand more about the network that you're in, and we've talked a little bit about that already. Think about those with influence. Who's trusted? Who are those trusted people who can help you to build the network? And when I think about Together and Active Future, we've done work with all different parts of our community. So we've done work with schools, we've done work with madrasas, which are religious education settings within the Islamic faith, often connected to mosques. We have done work with mental health teams, we've done work with housing associations in partnership with Active Lancashire and others. And one of the keys where the work has been really successful is that we've partnered with either a person or an organisation who is trusted by that cohort. So, for example, at the work that we've done with schools, we linked up and connected with the school's games organiser who's been working in this area for 10 plus years and is a trusted individual who's got expertise, but also relationships and connections where people trust her. And so as we worked with her, it's been easier for us to build relationships and connect, and then have influence in those connections through finding those trusted partners. And when we think about communities, for example, and communities that we're trying to support or understand, really important to find those who have influence within those communities and places who are trusted. Then a key principle, number 3, is to build habitual connecting first. And what I mean by that is this the habit of, on a regular basis, connecting together, and both on an individual and a group level, and then to scale that then with potentially more formal processes, whether it's regular network meetings or events. But it's important that there's a habit behind the connection, and that we need to be intentional. Networks don't build and develop and aren't sustained without some intentional effort. They don't happen by chance. But we can be intentional about the things that we do and the things that we work on. And the final thing is to be really clear on the purpose. Why would connection help? It can be really great to go and host a networking type event for people who are similarly minded to you or work in a similar space. And you can have a really great time, and maybe people will come to the next event and maybe the next one after that. But if we're not clear on what the purpose is, if there's not a sense of doing something together, if there's not a sense of we know why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish together, then very quickly that network connection, the closeness of that network very quickly dissipates. And so being clear on purpose is really important. Here's 8 things that I think are hopefully fairly practical that you can think about and build into your work as you seek to establish and develop networks. One of the first things that we've learned, or that I've learned, is to start with our end in mind. And when I say our, I mean the collective end, the collective purpose that we might be thinking about, or perhaps even more importantly, as we start to interact with people, to focus the conversation on the thing that they're looking to accomplish, the thing that they're looking to do. Another great thing, a key action to take in network network building is to share, introduce, and invite. And great network builders try to connect people to each other rather than holding all the connections with themselves. The next is to compliment and express gratitude. I think, if I can be bold, I think there's something about British culture generally, not speaking about us individually, but generally, where we like to have a bit of a moan and we like to have a bit of a complain, and we sometimes can talk about other people in a way that's not particularly positive. And that damages our collective network. Being complimentary and expressing gratitude to those who you work with, those who you connect with, and others, even people that you might consider, organizational competitors, for example, still really important to talk about their strengths, to talk about things that they're good at, and be positive in our language. The next, it's about informal connections. It's about going for a coffee. It's about getting outside of the workspace so that you can connect on a more informal level. It's about using inclusive language. When you're talking to people, it's not about mine or yours or that other organization's work. It's about us, it's our, it's we. And it's surprising, actually, as you just start to use those collective pronouns, that can over time start to build a sense of connectedness and inclusivity. We've touched on this point already, but I like this phrase, it's not mine, but to respect intentional consistency more than you revere intensity. In our little breakout room, I was talking about how at the beginning of TaAF, we held a really big connection event that had the makings of forming some really important relationships and connections. But then for a few months, we didn't have the right mechanism to follow up with that and to continue to build on that energy. And so it dissipated. We lost those connections. People perhaps felt a bit confused about why nothing had happened since. And so smaller, more consistent, intentional effort is more useful than the big one-off shows of affection. One great thing that I think you can do that's really important is to stop meeting sat around tables indoors, but to start to connect with people outside, whether that's going for a walk. When was the last time in your work setting that someone said, "Hey, do you want to just come and throw a frisbee at the park for half an hour and have a chat?" Like, that's probably never happened to any of us in our work life. That would be great. And actually, the connection and conversation that you would have in that setting would be much more valuable and much more meaningful and much more authentic. And one of the things about being outside or on a walk or playing a game of tennis or whatever, throwing a frisbee, whatever it might be, is it's comfortable then to have silence. And when you sat around a table, it can be awkward if you just both sit there for 30 seconds while you think about what to say. But when you're on a walk, you can be a bit more thoughtful about the conversation you're having, because it's okay to be quiet for a few seconds or a few minutes while you climb that stile or walk around the corner and you're enjoying the beautiful nature outside. I think the final thing that share is this idea of feelings being more important than facts, that stories, that connecting on an emotional level can be really important. And you can think about the stories that you tell, and you can improve your storytelling capability by using little stories and examples. And stories don't have to be big, long stories, but I just shared one then of, when you can imagine two people sat across a table from each other having a conversation, and that feeling awkward, but as opposed to being outside and walking up and crossing a stile and walking around the corner and saying, that's a story. And as you talk to people in stories and share examples, that evokes feelings, and it's feelings that tie humans together, not facts, not figures. It's shared experiences and feelings. And so think about ways in which you can create feelings that connect you. And if you're not sure about your ability to build networks, then rest assured that any of us can do it. Individually, ants are not very capable. Ants are fairly stupid compared to humans, if you like, individually. But collectively, ants build some of the most fantastic ecosystems in nature. And they do that by building really effective networks between each others, but their networks are built on the individual physical connections where they share feelings through hormones and through sense, but they interact purely on an individual basis. But by having lots and lots of individual connections, they can form connection at scale in huge ecosystems where they can hunt for food, they can sense danger, they can build nests and all the rest of it. And they collaborate and cooperate for the greater good. Ants don't have an ego. They don't have that individualistic, I'm trying to get what's right for me. They're all about being what's right for us. What can we do together? How do we look after each other? And they create incredible ecosystems. And I've thought about in our places, if we could create networks with all of the capability that we've got as humans, even half as effectively as ants, then we'd be on to a winner. And so if ants can do it, so can we. So I just want to share with you one example of the work we've been doing in Pennine, Lancashire. And this was, I mentioned it earlier, the work we've done with Innovisor about our Rossendale Connected network. So we helped, Innovisor helped us to map our network. So Rossendale Connected, the very quick story. Rossendale Connected formed during COVID. On the first connection event, there was 6 of us on a Zoom call where I'd invited 4 or 5 people. I used to work in Rossendale, 4 or 5 people to say, right, don't know what this pandemic is, but can we support our community? And I'd reached out to a few people who I knew. At the next meeting we had 20. At the next meeting we had 50, and we did all kinds of things. Like many places, this was not unique. We did many things that supported communities. But what we did then was we transitioned the purpose of that network to have a broader health and wellbeing focus. We gave it a name. It's called Rossendale Connected. And over the last 3 or 4 years, that network has continued to connect on a monthly basis and through some monthly Zoom calls and 6 monthly events, with a focus on health and wellbeing, with a real sense of purpose of tackling inequality, and particularly physical activity inequality in that borough. And so we asked Innovisor to map the network to help us understand it first, and this was one of the network maps. And 85 people responded to the survey, and they listed the people that they felt that they connected with regularly. And you can see here that there were 5 people who were particularly influential, that were particularly had a lot of connections, and that people connected to regularly. And if you think about the 3% rule that I shared earlier, well, there was 5 people, and the Rossendale Connected network is about 120, 130 people, and so the maths kind of makes sense there. What's interesting was how people felt about the network. And so sometimes when you think about place-based networks, many of you will have networks in your place, and you might wonder, like, well, what's the purpose of it? How do people feel about it? Is it useful? I just wanted to flash up, these were 13 questions that assessed how people felt about the network. And if I click on, if you look at these 3 that I've highlighted in red and yellow there, I believe Rossendale Connected activities bring important benefits to the people of Rossendale. And green is agree, and yellow is neutral, and the red's a disagree. I think we're on the right path to working collaboratively to improve the health and wellbeing in Rossendale. You can see the green there, average score 4.33 out of 5. I appreciate the role of Rossendale Connected, and we talked about appreciation already. And I feel informed about the purpose of Rossendale Connected, this idea of having a clear sense of purpose. And again, you can see the greens there, and there's others. But if I think about the key features of the Rossendale Connected network, it's been consistent, it's been regular, it's had a clear sense of purpose. There was a beginning of some informal connecting, and then there was some process added. So there's scheduled monthly meetings with then every 6 months a get together. And the team in Rossendale, Phil and Jackie and the team, have done a brilliant job, and with the help of Innovisor, of understanding their network in a really detailed way and being able to utilise the network for the good of local residents in a really connected and collaborative way. And there's loads of examples that we can share, and there's a lot more detail, and we can perhaps share the detail of the Rossendale Connected work. If you go to the Together Active Future website and look under learning, there's sharing the learning reports there that you'll be able to see. So in summary, distributed networks are effective for working in the public sector on complex social issues. It's important to understand your networks. It's important to find the influencers and align on shared purpose. The connections are going to happen one by one in all of those ways that we've talked about and that you shared in your breakout rooms as well. But it's going to take consistency and effort. And that focus on feelings through stories is a really important way to build those human connections. Hopefully that's a summary of some of the things that we've shared today.